What if your silence was the loudest thing in the room? What if your calm presence alone made others uneasy? Have you ever noticed how some people get uncomfortable when you start choosing yourself? The truth is, your strength threatens those who rely on your weakness to feel powerful, and they know it before you even do. There are people in this world who quietly hope that you never discover your true power, not because you're unworthy of it, but because once you realize how strong you actually are, they'll lose their grip on you. You might have already experienced this, that subtle shift in the air when you stopped going along with things that didn't align with you, when you stopped nodding along just to keep the peace, when you said no without guilt. That's when certain people started acting differently. They didn't like it, not because you did something wrong, but because you stopped being easy to manipulate. You stopped being predictable, and they could feel it. True strength doesn't shout. It doesn't plead for approval. It just is. It shows up in your calm presence, in your quiet confidence. When you no longer crave validation, when you walk with clarity and purpose, you instantly become more powerful than most. And that unsettles people. That's why sometimes people fear you, even when you've done absolutely nothing at all. They sense a quiet storm inside you, a strength you might not even be aware of yet. The kind of strength that doesn't cling, doesn't beg, doesn't need anyone to stand tall. The kind of strength that can walk alone and remain unshaken, and that terrifies them. So, what do? They try to pull you back. They'll say things to make you second-guess yourself. They'll tell you you're too intense, too different, too much. They'll suggest you tone it down, not for your sake, but for theirs. But let's be honest. You are not the problem. You simply reflect back to them the parts they're afraid to confront within themselves. You don't have to dim your light to make others feel comfortable in their shadows. It's time you start seeing yourself the way they already do, as someone they can't control, someone whose very existence challenges their illusion of power. Have you ever felt someone tried to shrink you just because they couldn't handle your energy? You're not alone. Your presence alone says more than any words ever could. There are two kinds of power in this world. The first kind is loud and desperate. It demands attention. It shouts, performs, and constantly seeks the spotlight. But the second? That's the kind you carry. It's quiet, grounded, and impossible to ignore. The kind of power that walks into a room and changes the atmosphere without making a sound. You've seen it before. A person enters a meeting, a dinner, a social space, and suddenly everything shifts. Not because they try to be seen, but because they can't be unseen. And as we move forward, let's take a deeper look into where that quiet strength truly comes from. That quiet presence, the one that doesn't beg to be noticed, but still changes the energy in a room. That's where true power begins to show. You've seen it happen. One person enters the space, and without a single word, the entire room subtly shifts. Conversations pause, heads turn. It's not because they demanded attention, it's because their presence commanded it. People feel it in their gut, an instinctive awareness that something or someone has entered who doesn't move like the rest. They don't have to announce who they are. They don't need to speak loudly or prove a single thing. They simply exist, confidently, quietly, fully. And that alone is enough to make others uncomfortable. Because here's the truth. Real power doesn't seek validation. It doesn't wait for permission. It doesn't check to see if it's accepted. It just is. It stands firm regardless of applause or approval, and that unsettles people, especially those who've spent their entire lives chasing acceptance, trying to fit in, striving to be noticed. When someone like you enters their world, someone who clearly doesn't play by those rules, it shakes the ground beneath them. Your calm confidence, your refusal to conform, your ability to stand strong in your own truth, it rattles people. You may not even be fully aware of the strength you carry, but others can sense it. They see it before you do. And when they realize that you are not someone who can be easily swayed or controlled, it triggers something in them. Some will feel drawn to you, respecting you without knowing exactly why. Others, they'll feel threatened. They might try to provoke you, to test your resolve, to disrupt your stillness, just to see if they can. Not because you've wronged them, but because your strength makes them question their own. Have you ever noticed a sudden shift in how people treat you when you stopped over-explaining yourself? When you no longer waited for approval? When you walked away from the need to prove your worth? That reaction wasn't random. It was because your energy no longer matched what they were used to. Some people fall silent in your presence. Others lash out. But many simply don't know how to handle it, because the version of you that once played small, once made them comfortable, is gone. And what remains is someone they can no longer control. True power isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. It's measured in how little you need to say. It's felt in the calm you carry when others are shaking. The greatest figures in history didn't plead for attention. They walked in truth so firmly that the world couldn't look away. So what happens when you finally begin to own that power consciously rather than accidentally? Let's explore that next. So, what happens when you start carrying that quiet strength with intention? When you no longer just have presence, but own it? The Stoics had an answer. The greatest Stoics, those who walk the talk, understood this power profoundly. Take Marcus Aurelius, for example. He was the most powerful man in the Roman Empire, yet he never needed to flaunt his position. He didn't surround himself with empty praise or chase admiration. Instead, he wrote to himself. In his private journals, he reminded himself to remain grounded, to resist the temptation of ego, to stay in command of his mind and emotions. He knew that true power didn't come from the outside. It came from within. That's self-mastery, and it's not loud or flashy. It's the way you move through life with stillness in your soul, no matter how loud the world becomes. When you walk into a room, people notice, not just what you say, but how you exist in that space. They watch how you carry yourself, how you stand, how you respond when things get uncomfortable. They notice when you don't fidget, when you don't rush to speak, when you let the silence breathe instead of suffocating it with nervous chatter. They sense something different. You don't play by the rules of approval. You're not there to impress. You don't perform for acceptance. You operate on a different wavelength, and they feel it, and it makes some people uneasy. They'll try to test you, not because you've done anything wrong, but because they want to see if they can shake you. They might interrupt you mid-sentence. They might dismiss your ideas or toss passive-aggressive comments your way. Not to challenge your logic, but to chip away at your gum, to see if they can provoke a crack, to confirm their hope that you'll shrink, stumble, or start seeking their validation. But here's where everything shifts if you don't take the bait. If you remain composed, if your energy doesn't rise to meet theirs. If you hold your posture and your poise, they feel powerless because their tactics depend on your reaction. And when you don't react, you don't give them anything to feed off. The way you carry yourself becomes your silent message to the world. It tells people how they're allowed to treat you. If you walk in with hesitation, they'll mirror it. If you move with doubt, they'll question your value. But if you step in with calm certainty, if you don't seek permission, if you don't chase approval, if you can sit in silence with confidence, they will feel it, and they'll respond accordingly. So here's the question you need to ask yourself. How are you showing up in the world? Are you apologizing for simply existing? Are you explaining yourself too much? Are you letting others shape your emotions, thoughts, and direction? Or are you standing your ground, unmoved, unapologetic, and quietly unshakable? Because the answer to that will shape everything that comes next. And that's exactly what we'll uncover in the next part. When you stop apologizing for your presence and start owning it, something shifts, not just inside of you, but in the way the world responds. This isn't about arrogance. It's not about dominating others. It's about knowing yourself so clearly, so deeply, that your very presence speaks before you do. It's about moving through life with the quiet assurance of someone who doesn't need to perform, doesn't need to persuade, and certainly doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. True power isn't loud. It doesn't shout to be heard. It radiates from within, unshakable and calm. And when you carry yourself with that kind of certainty, people feel it, they sense it, and they respond to it. When you stop chasing approval, when you stop jumping at every challenge thrown your way, when you no longer wait for someone to grant you permission to act, something fundamental changes. The energy around you shifts. Some will admire you, some will fear you, and some will try to tear you down. But none of them, none, will be able to ignore you. So, what's your next move? It's simpler than you think. Stop explaining yourself to people who have already made up their minds. Stop overanalyzing every step, every word, every choice. Stop waiting for someone to say, now you're allowed to be powerful. You don't need permission. Own your space. Walk with clarity. And let your presence speak louder than anything you could ever say. Because here's the truth. A person who doesn't need approval cannot be controlled. Take David, for example. They told him he was wasting his time. They said he was unrealistic. They mocked his dream and told him to get a real job. But David didn't listen. He loved art, painting, music, creation. That was his world. It made him feel alive. But the world around him didn't value that. Where he grew up, people didn't see art as a serious pursuit. They called it a nice hobby, not a career. They pushed him to follow the traditional path, to settle, to be practical, to fit in. And for a while he doubted himself. He wondered if maybe they were right, if maybe chasing this dream really was foolish. But then David made a choice. A quiet, powerful, life-changing decision. He stopped seeking approval. He stopped asking, is this okay? And he started betting on himself, even when no one else would. The road wasn't easy. He worked long nights, took tiny commissions, learned every skill he could get his hands on. There were setbacks, and there was doubt. But he kept going. And then something interesting happened. The same people who once dismissed him, they started paying attention. The same voices that once mocked him, they started asking him how he did it, because he had done something they were too afraid to do. he chose himself. That is what it looks like when you stop living for approval and start living from power. And in the next part, we'll explore exactly why choosing yourself, even when it's hard, is the key to unlocking everything else. When David stopped asking for permission and chose himself, he stepped into a truth that many people spend their whole lives avoiding. The world only starts to take you seriously when you do. Think about it. How many times have you stood at the edge of a decision, hesitating, not because you didn't know what to do, but because you were afraid of what others might think? How many moments have you held your tongue, played it small, faded into the background, not because you lacked capability, but because the fear of judgment was louder than your own voice? That ends now, because here's the truth. If you need constant approval, you can be controlled, and as long as you can be controlled, you will never be truly free. From the time we're children, society teaches us to seek validation. We're rewarded for fitting in, praised for staying inside the lines. We're told what's respectable, what's safe, what's worth pursuing. But what's really happening is more subtle and more dangerous. They're training you to not think for yourself, because once you start questioning the script, once you step outside their neat little boxes, you become something they can't predict, and people fear what they can't control. That's why when you stop asking for approval, some people panic. They try to shame you, guilt you, coerce you into falling back in line, not out of love or concern, but because your independence threatens their comfort. It forces them to confront something they've avoided, that maybe they too were capable of choosing differently, that maybe they've spent years living on autopilot, following rules they never questioned, pursuing goals they never truly wanted, trapped in lives that feel more like performances than real experiences. How many people do you know who spend their entire lives like that? Working jobs that drain their spirit, staying in relationships that suffocate their growth, living under expectations that were never theirs to begin with. They aren't truly living, they're performing. And that's why they need you to keep playing the part too. Because if you step out of line, if you choose something bold, something honest, something true, then they're forced to confront the hardest question of all. Why didn't they? That's why your freedom terrifies them. And yet, the Stoics knew this truth long ago. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor of Rome, never based his worth on public opinion. He understood that living for the crowd meant living someone else's life. And Epictetus, born into slavery, became one of the most respected philosophers of his time. Not because anyone gave him permission, but because he stopped letting circumstance define his identity. That's the power of someone who reclaims their mind and chooses their path. In the next part, we'll uncover how you can start making those same internal shifts, no matter where you are in life. In the lives of those like David and the Stoics, one truth became crystal clear. No one gives you permission to be powerful. You have to claim it yourself. And now, it's your turn. So let me ask you, honestly, directly, what would you do if no one else's opinion had power over you? What if no one was watching? No one to judge, no one to praise or criticize, just you, your truth, and your decision. What? Would you choose? Would you walk away from that job that drains your spirit day after day? Would you finally speak up for what you believe in without filtering your voice to keep others comfortable? Would you chase that buried dream, the one you locked away because someone once told you it wasn't realistic? Deep down, you already know the answer, because the truth is this: you don't need permission to be great. Greatness isn't handed out like a certificate. No one's coming to tap you on the shoulder and say, "Now you're worthy." You have to declare it for yourself, to yourself, and when you do, don't expect it to be easy. You will face resistance. You will feel doubt. You will encounter people who question you, challenge you, even mock your courage. But that's not a sign you're failing. It's proof you're moving in the right direction. Because the weak, they wait, they seek permission, they live by rules someone else wrote for them. They need the world to tell them what's acceptable. But the strong write their own rules. They don't wait to be chosen. They choose themselves. Just like David, he didn't need the world's approval. He struggled. He worked through silence, through rejection, through uncertainty. And in time, the very people who doubted him, they respected him, not because he silenced their voices, but because he amplified his own. That's what you must do. Stop explaining yourself. Stop asking for validation. Stop holding your breath, waiting for a sign. The world doesn't reward hesitation. It rewards movement. It rewards those who decide that they are enough long before anyone else believes it. Be that person. Be the one who doesn't need to be told they're powerful to start acting like it. Because the moment you let go of the need for approval, you become unstoppable. And that's when a new challenge begins, one far more subtle, but just as crucial. You'll find yourself in a different kind of test. Not about action, but about reaction. Not about chasing control, but keeping your center when others try to break it. Let's talk about that next. Once you stop seeking approval, you gain power. But the next battle isn't about what you do. It's about how you react when others try to take that power away. The truth is, people will test you. They'll push your buttons, bait your emotions, and wait to see if they can make you break. Because the moment you react the way they want, you hand them control. Without realizing it, you've just told them, "You can manipulate me." This happens everywhere. In business, one side stays calm, composed. The other becomes emotional, impatient. Guess who walks away with the better deal? In relationships, one person holds steady. The other lets their anger speak. Guess who keeps the power? Even in the smallest moments, someone cuts you off in traffic, a coworker makes a snide remark, a stranger online tosses out disrespect just to provoke you, and the moment you snap, they win. Why? Because control doesn't belong to the one who yells the loudest. It belongs to the one who doesn't flinch. Most people live like slaves to their emotions. They let anger drive their decisions. They let annoyance set their tone. They allow the noise of others to pull them into pointless battles. But the one who stays calm, the one who chooses his response instead of reacting blindly, is the one who can never be controlled. Marcus Aurelius understood this with absolute clarity. He was the ruler of Rome, yet his greatest conquest was internal. He wrote to himself, not to impress others, but to remind his own mind. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. This wasn't just philosophical reflection. It was strategy. It was armor. Because in a world full of chaos, the one who can stay composed has the advantage. The world belongs to those who remain grounded when others panic. To those who stay focused while others are distracted. To those who can stand inside the fire and not get burned. Think back to the last time someone tried to push you over the edge. Was it a coworker, a family member, maybe an anonymous voice behind a screen? They hurled words, they threw attitude, they tried to get a rise out of you. And what did they want? They wanted your reaction. They wanted to see if they could make you dance to their rhythm. But what happens when you don't take the bait? What happens when you simply look them in the eye and walk away? When you nod and keep your peace, that's when their strategy collapses. Because their entire game depends on your emotional weakness. And when you don't give it to them, they have nothing. And in that moment, you win. But there's more to emotional control than just walking away. In the next part, we'll dive deeper into how your inner stillness can become your greatest weapon, not just against others, but against the chaos of life itself. The moment you stop reacting to their games, their chaos loses its grip, and what remains is your most underrated advantage, self-control. Controlling yourself is the most powerful weapon you will ever own. Truly. People will try to trigger you. They'll stir the pot, create drama, throw words like bait, hoping to drag you into their storm. But if you stay still, if you remain unshaken, if you refuse to step into their battlefield, something incredible happens. They wear themselves out. They swing at air. They end up fighting a war that only exists in their mind, while you walk away untouched. Let's bring this into something real and relatable. Imagine a high-stakes business meeting. Two partners in conflict. One is red-faced, slamming the table, raising his voice, trying to dominate the room. The other? Calm, steady, quietly observing. The loud one believes he's winning simply because he's louder. But in reality, he's unraveling. Because the one who controls himself is always the one who ultimately controls the outcome. He will be the one who makes the final call, or picture an argument at home or in public. One person is flinging accusations, their words sharp like daggers, desperately seeking a reaction. The other person listens, quietly, without flinching. And when they finally speak, they do so slowly, calmly, clearly. And in that moment, the aggressor suddenly feels exposed. Because true power doesn't roar. It whispers with confidence. And here's the key. You can train yourself to master this. First, slow everything down. The instant you feel your emotions rising, don't react. Pause. Breathe. Say nothing. Let the silence speak for you. Most people are terrified of silence. They rush to fill it with excuses, arguments, and defensiveness. Let them. While they scramble, you hold your ground. Second, reframe the moment. See provocation for what it is, a test, not an attack. When someone tries to rile you up, recognize it as a signal of their weakness, not your own. Because only the weak need to provoke others to feel strong, and once you see it clearly, you take away its power. Third, never let someone else's emotional chaos become your own. Just because they're angry doesn't mean you have to be. Just because they panic doesn't mean you should. Just because they yell doesn't mean you raise your voice too. You are not their mirror. You are not their puppet. Control yourself, and you control the situation. And here's the final truth. Most people will never admit. Most people will spend their lives reacting, defending, over-explaining, getting pulled into fights that were never worth their time. They will allow their emotions to be turned against them, living like puppets. tugged by strings they don't even realize are there, but not you. Because in the next part, we'll explore how to cut those invisible strings for good and live on your terms, no matter what chaos surrounds you. In a world where most people are pulled like puppets by every word, every insult, every jab, your refusal to react becomes your greatest rebellion. But not you, not anymore, because now you see it clearly. They only have power over you if you hand it to them. And today, you take it back. The next time someone tries to push your buttons, remember this: your reaction is always your choice. Your emotions are your responsibility. And the moment you master yourself, the moment you stop letting others dictate your state, you become untouchable. That's when something remarkable happens. Your silence becomes their nightmare. Have you ever noticed how some people can't handle silence? How they squirm in its presence, desperately throwing words into the air. Explanations, justifications, accusations, anything to escape the discomfort of their own thoughts. They argue, they provoke, they toss around insults like bait, hoping you'll bite. They need a reaction from you because your response validates their power. But when you give them nothing, when you simply sit still, eyes steady, face calm, they begin to unravel. Because nothing terrifies a manipulator more than someone who refuses to be manipulated. Your silence isn't emptiness. It's strength. It's presence. It's a mirror that reflects their chaos back at them. It forces them to sit with their own behavior, with no distractions and no drama to hide behind. Think about it. When was the last time someone tried to drag you into a fight you didn't ask for? Maybe it was a coworker trying to assert dominance. Maybe it was a family member playing guilt games. Maybe it was some stranger online spitting venom from behind a keyboard, hoping to shake you. They weren't looking for resolution. They were looking for emotional submission. They wanted you to defend yourself, to explain, to stumble, to lose your grounding so they could feel powerful again. But the moment you chose silence, the moment you simply refused to take the bait, they lost control. Sure, they might laugh it off, pretend it doesn't matter, but inside, they're scrambling. They came prepared for war, and now they're swinging at shadows. They don't know what to do with someone they can't provoke, because real power, it doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to prove itself. It just is. And that's why history remembers those who stood firm, not because they were the loudest, but because they were the most unshakable. So how do you become that kind of person? Not just in moments of conflict, but in the way you live every single day. Let's explore that next. In history and in life, those remembered with the deepest respect are not the loudest, but the most composed. They didn't flinch. They didn't explain. They didn't react. They simply stood their ground. The warriors who stood tall when others crumbled. The leaders who held their silence instead of defending themselves. The thinkers who let their actions, not their arguments, speak on their behalf. Take Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome. He had the power to crush his critics with a single command, but he didn't. He chose restraint. He understood a timeless truth: reacting to fools makes you one of them. So he trained his mind to remain still in the face of chaos. And because he mastered himself, no one, not even the most powerful voices around him, could ever truly control him. Then there's Epictetus, born a slave, insulted, dismissed, disrespected, yet he never let any of it shake him. He understood something few ever do. Words only have power if you believe them. He guarded his mind like a fortress. He decided what mattered and what didn't. And because of that, no one could take his dignity, not even in chains. Now, look at your own life. How often have you found yourself trying to justify who you are to people who don't even deserve a seat at your table? How many times have you spent energy explaining yourself to those who had no intention of understanding you in the first place? Let them think what they want. Let them fill the silence with their own insecurities. Let them talk themselves in circles, projecting their fears, their doubts, their fragile egos into the space between you. You owe them nothing, because the moment you stop defending yourself, you stop playing their game. And the moment you stop playing, you've already won. Yes, it's uncomfortable for them. Your silence forces them to face what they've been trying to avoid, their own inner mess, their own lack of control, their own fear of not being heard. That's why they push harder. They need you to react. They need proof they still hold some sway over your emotions. But what happens when you don't? When you just look at them calmly, say nothing, and move on? Suddenly they start to doubt themselves. Maybe they were wrong. Maybe they overreacted. Maybe they never had the power they thought they did. And once that seed of doubt is planted in their mind, they've already lost. That's how you win battles without lifting a finger. In a negotiation, it's the person who speaks the least who often holds the most leverage. In arguments, it's the one who remains calm that stays in control. And in life, it's the one who doesn't chase validation that earns lasting respect. Because let's be honest, most people are addicted to validation. They need reassurance. They need someone to tell them they're strong, they're right, they're in charge. So what happens when you refuse to give them what they crave? That's exactly what we'll uncover next. When you stop feeding others the validation they crave, they lose their grip, and your silence becomes the loudest thing. In the room, people who are desperate for validation will do anything to pull you into their chaos. They'll bait you into arguments, provoke emotional responses, try to entangle you in drama that was never yours to begin with. Why? Because they need you to engage. They need your reaction to feel important, to feel seen, to feel like they matter. But the moment you refuse to play their game, when you offer no reaction, no approval, no energy, something inside them begins to unravel. That's how you truly disarm them, by giving them nothing. That doesn't mean you become passive. It doesn't mean you let people walk all over you or accept disrespect in silence. It means you rise above it. You understand that not every battle deserves your sword. That some victories come not from fighting back, but from standing still. It means recognizing when your silence is the stronger response. When your calm presence speaks more than 1,000 arguments. When you let others expose their weakness without needing to lift a finger. It's emotional discipline. It's knowing that no one can control you if you control yourself. A man who debates fools becomes one. A man who keeps explaining himself to people who never intended to understand wastes his breath. And a man who reacts emotionally to every provocation, he gives away his power piece by piece. But the man who knows when to speak and when to stay silent, the one who watches others tire themselves out while he remains still, the one who holds his ground with quiet confidence, that man is untouchable. So the next time someone throws chaos at you, pause. Don't argue, don't explain, don't defend, just look at them. smile if you feel like it, and walk away, because your silence, it shakes them, and in that moment, you've already won, because you stopped playing their game altogether. Now, let's shift gears. Let's talk about someone who thought he was winning, until he realized the game he was playing wasn't worth the prize. After chasing status in all the wrong places, he finally realized what he thought was success was just another form of approval seeking. And approval, no matter how dressed up, is still a cage. There was always someone ahead of him, someone with more connections, more money, more charm, someone who played the game better, started earlier, or simply had advantages he would never have. And so he kept chasing, kept competing, kept trying to prove that he belonged in rooms that didn't even feel like home. But deep down, something didn't feel right. He felt it every time he forced himself into conversations that drained his energy, talking to people he didn't respect, about things that didn't matter. He felt it every time he bought things he didn't need, just to maintain an image, to keep up appearances, to make sure no one questioned whether he was really successful. He felt it most when he looked at himself in the mirror. After all the effort, all the pushing, all the pretending, he still didn't feel like he had won. And then one day, he stopped. He asked himself a question he had avoided for years. What am I really chasing? And why? In that moment, everything became clear. He wasn't chasing success. He was chasing validation. He wasn't building something meaningful. He was performing, working hard not to create, but to be seen. And the moment he saw that truth for what it was, everything shifted. He no longer needed the applause. He no longer cared about being accepted into circles that were built on comparison. He stepped back, stopped running, and chose to walk away from the game. And that's when he finally won. Because here's the truth, they don't want you to know. The ones who chase recognition, who compete for attention, who measure their worth by constantly comparing themselves to others. They aren't free. They are trapped in a never-ending race with no finish line. Trapped in a competition where winning just means the pressure gets heavier, the stakes get higher. Trapped in a life where their value is always borrowed, never owned. But the moment you walk away from all of that, the moment you realize you have nothing left to prove, you become untouchable. Most people will never reach that point. They're too deep in the illusion. They've been taught that success is about visibility, about recognition, about winning, no matter the cost. But what if real success looks completely different? That's exactly what we'll explore in the next part. When you stop chasing validation, you stop playing their game. And the moment you walk away from that game, you win in a way they'll never understand. What most people don't realize is this: the greatest kind of power doesn't come from proving yourself, it comes from no longer needing to. Think about the strongest, most grounded people you've ever met. Were they the ones constantly promoting themselves? Were they always broadcasting their wins, trying to be louder, trying to impress? Or were they the ones who moved with intention, with presence, quiet but unmistakable? The ones who didn't have to declare their strength because their energy spoke for them? There's a reason why the most respected person in the room is rarely the loudest. There's a reason why the calmest one at the table often has the most influence. There's a reason why those who don't seek attention are the ones others naturally gravitate toward. Because confidence, real confidence, doesn't scream. It whispers, it doesn't demand space, it owns it, and those who depend on the noise, they can't handle that silence. because they expect you to seek what they seek. They expect you to need applause, to crave approval, to measure your worth against their standards. But when you don't, when you step back, when you choose peace over performance, when you no longer compete for a place in their hierarchy, it unsettles them. They don't know how to respond to someone who isn't chasing status, someone who doesn't need permission, someone who doesn't care about being the loudest or the most admired. And that's when the attacks begin. They'll say you've given up. They'll call you lazy, unambitious, afraid to compete. But here's what they'll never admit out loud. They envy your freedom, because deep down they wish they could do the same, but they can't. They need the race. They need the constant noise. They need to keep playing the game, because without it, they'd have to face the uncomfortable truth. None of it actually matters, and that truth terrifies them. That's why walking away from the game, quietly, without apology, is the most powerful move you'll ever make. Because the moment you stop playing, you win. And this goes far beyond money or career. It's about life itself. Ask yourself, how many times have you tried to prove your worth? How often have you found yourself playing along in a game you didn't even believe in? Let's take a closer look at that in the next part. So many of us spend years competing in a game we never even wanted to join, only to look up one day and realize we don't even know why we were playing. How many times have you measured your worth using someone else's scoreboard? How often have you pursued things that looked like success but felt like emptiness? Enough. You don't owe anyone a performance. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need their permissions to be whole or their approval to be at peace. You don't need to keep playing just because they expect you to. The moment you stop chasing, the moment you stop trying to keep up and simply choose yourself, you win. Let them run. Let them compete. Let them build their identity on titles, applause, and fleeting validation. You have something more valuable, something they may never truly understand. You have the power to walk away. You have the freedom to stop performing. You have the courage to define success on your own terms. And that is the only way to truly win, by refusing to play a rigged game. But here's the twist. Sometimes, the moment you choose to live freely, you unintentionally shine a light on the ice parts of others they're trying to keep hidden. 6. You remind them of their own weakness. Some people won't resent you because you've hurt them. They'll resent you simply because your presence forces them to confront what they've ignored in themselves. You don't need to say anything. You don't need to explain or justify. By simply standing tall in your truth, by refusing to shrink to make others feel comfortable, you reveal what they've buried. You've seen it happen. The coworker who mocks your discipline, not because it's foolish, but because it highlights his laziness. The friend who rolls his eyes at your ambition, not because you're dreaming too big, but because he gave up on his own. The relative who calls you lucky, not out of admiration, but to dismiss the years of hard work and quiet sacrifice behind your growth. These people aren't really attacking you. They're attacking the reflection they see when they look at you. A version of themselves they never became. The one they abandoned long ago. It's one of the quiet truths of human nature. When people see strength, real, honest, self-made strength, it stirs something inside. Discomfort, envy, regret. Because deep down, they know. They had the same choices. They had the same hours in a day. But instead of rising, they stayed where it was safe. Instead of pushing through the pain, they gave in to comfort. Instead of building, They waited, and now the weight of that decision haunts them. So what do they do when your presence forces them to remember what they could have been? We'll uncover that in the next part. When your presence reminds people of what they could have been, it unsettles them. And sometimes the only way they know how to deal with that discomfort is to try to make you feel small. They challenge you, not because your choices are wrong, but because your very existence forces them to question everything they've accepted as truth. When you commit to growth, you expose those who have settled. When you choose discipline, you highlight the excuses they've leaned on for years. When you break the mold and refuse to conform, you show them that they were never truly trapped. They were just afraid. And that kind of self-realization, it's unbearable. So what do they do instead? They project, they mock, they belittle, they twist your strength into arrogance, hoping to strip it of its power. They call your focus obsession, your ambition, ego, your independence, coldness. They'll do anything they can to make your confidence seem like a flaw, because if they can convince themselves that you are the problem, then they don't have to face the truth staring back at them. Think about it. When was the last time someone subtly tried to bring you down? Maybe it was a backhanded compliment, a dismissive laugh, a passive-aggressive joke meant to make you second-guess yourself. Or maybe it was more direct, an open attack on your goals, your discipline, your choices. An attempt to drag you into an argument you never asked for, a deliberate effort to shake your foundation. But no matter the method, the message behind it is always the same. Stop being who you are. You're making me uncomfortable. But here's the truth they don't want to hear. Their discomfort is not your responsibility. Their insecurity is not yours to carry. You were not born to shrink so others can feel tall. You were not meant to slow your pace so they don't feel left behind. You were not put here to quiet your voice just because they never found the courage to use theirs. You are here to live boldly, fully, unapologetically. And yes, that might make people uncomfortable. Yes, it might make some angry. Yes, it might trigger those who have chosen comfort over courage. And when that happens, they may try to pull you back. Not because you've hurt them, but because your growth exposes their stagnation. But that has nothing to do with you. Their battle is not with your success. It's not even with your mindset. It's with themselves. And once you truly understand that, everything changes. You stop over-explaining. You stop defending. You stop giving your time and energy to people who aren't interested in rising, but only in staying comfortable. So what happens when you let go of that burden completely? That's what we'll explore next. Once you stop explaining, stop defending, and simply move forward with clarity, something powerful happens. You do the very thing they feared most. You prove them wrong without saying a word. You prove that their excuses were never real limitations, that they too had the same opportunities to choose differently, that the only thing ever holding them back was fear. Fear of judgment, fear of failure, fear of stepping into the unknown. And that is why some people despise you, not because of what you've achieved, but because of what your progress says about their inaction. They don't hate your success. They hate the mirror it holds up to their own failure. They don't hate your discipline. They hate what it reflects about their own lack of it. They don't hate your independence. They hate the fact that deep down, they're still chasing approval, still seeking validation they pretend not to need. But here's the final truth, and it's an important one. Some will see you and be inspired. They'll witness what you've done. And instead of resenting it, they'll take it as proof that they too can change. They'll rise, not resist. They'll evolve, not envy. And those are the people who matter. Those are the ones worth your time, your energy, your presence. So let the others talk. Let them whisper. Let them gossip and project and twist your strength into something they can handle. You don't need to argue. You don't need to defend. You don't need to convince anyone of anything. Just keep moving. Keep growing. Keep living in a way that silently challenges others to confront the truth they've been avoiding. Because love you or hate you, there's one thing they'll never be able to do: ignore you. And that's the power of integrity. Because respect, it lasts. But popularity, it fades. I once worked for a man who understood this deeply. He wasn't the most liked person in the company, and he never tried to be. He didn't sugarcoat the truth to make people feel better. He didn't bend under pressure or shift his values to stay agreeable. When others asked for special treatment, he stood firm. When executives pushed him to compromise ethics for the sake of profit, he said no. When conflict arose, he didn't take sides to gain favor. He chose principle over politics. At first, people called him cold, unapproachable, too rigid. They wanted someone who would be more agreeable, someone who played the game, someone who would just go along. But over time, something began to shift. The very people who once criticized him, they started to respect him, because while he wasn't always what they wanted, he was something much more valuable. And we'll uncover exactly what that was in the next part. Over time, people stopped seeing him as cold and started recognizing him for what he truly was, exactly what they needed. They began to realize something they hadn't noticed before. His decisions, while often unpopular, were always fair. His words, though blunt at times, were rooted in truth. And his leadership, though demanding, was steady, principled, and unshakable. When he eventually left the company, no one talked about how friendly he was. No one remembered him for casual conversations or polite small talk. What they remembered, what mattered, was his integrity. They remembered that he was a man who stood for something, a man whose word meant something, a man they could trust, because popularity is fleeting. It's a mask, an illusion. But respect, real, earned, unwavering respect, is a foundation, and most people don't understand this. They spend their lives chasing approval, smiling when they don't feel like smiling, nodding when they want to speak up, biting their tongue. To avoid conflict, trying to blend in, trying to belong, trying to be accepted. But for what? A shallow sense of belonging, a fleeting moment of validation, a fragile connection that disappears the second they stop pleasing others. And that's why so many people feel lost, empty, exhausted, because they've twisted and reshaped themselves for so long to fit everyone else's mold. They've forgotten who they really are. But there's another way, a harder way, yes, but one that leads to something solid, something real. You don't need to be liked. You need to be respected. And respect isn't given to those who follow the crowd. It's earned by those who stand apart. It's given to the ones with the courage to speak truth when everyone else stays silent, to the ones who choose what's right, even when it's unpopular, even when it costs them approval. Look around at history. How many of the world's most respected figures were adored in their time? Marcus Aurelius didn't rule Rome by chasing approval. He ruled with wisdom, discipline, and inner control. He didn't seek applause. He made choices that lasted. Epictetus, once a slave, didn't write for recognition. He wrote for truth. And because of that, his words outlived kings and emperors. People will test you. They will push. They will pressure. They will try to mold you into someone easier to understand, someone more agreeable, more comfortable. And if your goal is to be liked, you will fold. You will adjust your voice to match theirs. You will bend your values to stay accepted, and you will lose pieces of yourself for a version of belonging that was never real. But if your goal is to be respected, then you will do what is right, even when no one claps. And in the next part, we'll talk about how to hold the line when that moment comes. When you choose respect over approval, you choose a path that's harder in the short term, but unshakable in the long run. Yes, it may cost you. You might lose people. You might face criticism, rejection, or even isolation. You'll be called stubborn, unyielding, difficult, but stay the course, because over time, even the ones who judged you, who didn't understand your decisions, who spoke behind your back, will begin to see clearly. They may not admit it openly, but deep down, even those who resent strength can't help but respect it. Even those who dislike your certainty will remember it, because in the end, respect is the only thing that outlives everything else. Not charm, not likability, not people-pleasing, just respect. Think about your own life. How many times have you stayed silent when your soul was begging you to speak? How many times have you nodded in agreement with things you didn't truly believe just to avoid discomfort? How often have you shaped your actions around what others might think, only to realize their opinions never really mattered? Enough. You don't need their permission. You don't need their acceptance. You don't need to keep squeezing yourself into a version of life that was never designed for you. The only thing you do need is to live in such a way that years from now, when someone speaks your name, they don't just say, "He was nice." They say, "He was solid." Because popularity fades, but respect, that endures. Choose accordingly. 8. You are the storm, not the shelter. Some people spend their entire lives trying to avoid the storm. They walk lightly, avoid confrontation, seek comfort over challenge. They mold themselves into the shape that causes the least friction. They make themselves small, safe, agreeable, believing that's how they'll survive. But here's the truth. Safety is an illusion. The world doesn't reward those who hide. It doesn't remember the ones who stayed quiet, kept their heads down, stayed out of the way. It remembers those who moved with intention, those who disrupted, those who challenged, those who refused to be shaped, and instead shaped the world around them. That's why you weren't born to be the shelter. You were born to be the storm. You weren't made to live small. You weren't made to stay agreeable at all costs. And in the next part, we'll talk about what happens when you stop apologizing for that power and finally learn to use it. You weren't made to fit into someone else's version of life. You were made to break through it. You were never meant to live your life according to the expectations of people who don't even understand you. You weren't made to stay quiet, stay small, or stay agreeable just to keep others comfortable. You were made to disrupt, to challenge, to go beyond what others believed was possible. And the moment you stop running from the storm, the moment you realize that you are the storm, everything changes. Think back to a time when you tried to mold yourself into what others wanted, when you silenced your voice to avoid conflict, when you played down your dreams so others wouldn't feel threatened, when you chose safety over growth because growth meant stepping into uncertainty. And what did it bring you? Did it bring peace? Or did it leave you restless, disconnected, unfulfilled? Because deep down you knew you were built for more. You knew the life you were living wasn't aligned with the life you were meant to create. You knew every time you stayed quiet, every time you held back, you were betraying yourself. And that's why the storm inside you never died. It waited, it watched, it stayed patient until you were ready, and now it's time to let it rise. This is what they fear. They don't fear your mistakes. They fear your potential. They fear what happens when you stop following the script. Because the moment you decide to live with power and intention, you become someone they can no longer predict or control. That's why people fear those who move with certainty. It's why the ones who think for themselves, who break the cycle, who choose their own path are called rebels, disruptors, even dangerous, because the world runs on control, on systems designed to keep most people obedient. Systems built to prevent people from realizing just how powerful they truly are. But look at history. The ones who shaped the world were never the ones who played it safe. They didn't hide from the storm. They walked into it and became it. Marcus Aurelius ruled Rome not by running from hardship, but by meeting it with unshakable discipline and clarity. Epictetus, born into slavery, rose above his circumstances, not because someone gave him permission, but because he took control of his own mind. And now, the question turns inward. Look at your own life. Where have you been playing small? Where have you been choosing comfort over courage? Where have you've seen what happens when you choose safety over courage? Now it's time to ask yourself, how much longer will you let others define your worth? Enough. You don't need their approval. You don't need their permission. You don't need to shrink yourself to fit into the frame someone else built for you. You don't owe explanations to people who were never meant to understand your path. You were never here to make sense to small minds. The storm doesn't apologize for its strength. The ocean doesn't ask permission to rise, and neither should you. You'll hear the warnings. Be careful. Be realistic. Don't move too fast. Think about how others might feel. Stay inside the lines. But here's the truth no one says out loud. They're not really concerned about your well-being. They're concerned about control. They want you to stay predictable, to keep things comfortable, to not disturb the peace they've created, the peace that only exists if you stay small. Let them be comfortable. Let them keep their pace. You have a different calling. There's something inside you that refuses to be silenced. A pull, a fire, a storm that doesn't want to sit quietly on the sidelines. You were not born to watch life pass by from a safe distance. You were born to move, to build, to disrupt, to create impact. So, stop waiting for permission. Stop apologizing for your power. Stop seeking validation in a world that fears people who don't ask for approval. You're not the shelter. You are the storm. And the moment you accept that, fully, without hesitation, you'll come to a powerful realization. No one has been holding you back except you. Because power isn't something you earn through approval. It's something you claim in how you walk, how you speak, how you live. Most people spend their lives chasing validation, trying to fit into expectations that were never meant for them. trying to stay inside lines they never even drew. But the ones who stand out, the ones who shift the room without saying a word, they move with purpose. They don't beg to be accepted. They simply exist so powerfully that the world has no choice but to adjust. You don't need to justify your strength. You don't need to explain your ambition. You don't need to tone yourself down to be palatable. Once you realize this truly, realize it, you stop playing by their rules. You become unreadable, unshakable, untouchable. They'll fear you. They'll challenge you. They'll try to break you. But all of that only means one thing. They already know how powerful you are, even if you haven't fully seen it yet. So, what now? Now it's time to take these truths and live them, to embody them, to put them into practice. And in the next part, we'll talk about exactly how to do that. Now that you understand your power comes from within, the next step is to live it, not with loud words, but with quiet, unwavering presence. Let your presence lead the way. Let your actions, not your explanations, speak for you. Let the way you carry yourself become your loudest declaration. Every single day is a chance to sharpen your edge, to build a foundation so solid, so grounded, that no storm can shake you. Not because you scream louder than others, but because you've learned to move with certainty, no matter the noise. And now I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced that shift? That moment when something inside you clicked and you realized you no longer needed permission to be powerful? Maybe it was subtle, maybe it was dramatic, but either way, it was yours. Share your story in the comments, because your breakthrough might be the spark someone else has been waiting for. Your courage might be the exact reminder another person needs to stop seeking approval and start owning their life. In a world that rewards noise, choose to be the quiet force no one can ignore. You are not here to be accepted. You are here to be undeniable, and that is how you win.